Looks like my mic's working. So.
Okay, all right. Rebecca, will you pull the gold trace to my office so that I can't see my great boxes back there, all the hard work that I'm not doing? Well, good afternoon. My name is Wendy Olson, United States Attorney for the District of Idaho. With me this afternoon are Stephen Boyd, who is the Special Agent in charge for the Internal Revenue Service Criminal Investigation Office that covers the District of Idaho. Stephen. Also Tyler Hatcher, the Resident Agent in charge for the IRS Criminal Investigation Office in Boise. Tyler's right here. Ernie Wyand, who is the Resident Agent in charge for the Boise office of the FBI. IRS CI Special Agent Keith Tippett. Keith, will you put your hand up? FBI Special Agent Rebecca Morse. Assistant United States Attorney George Breitzemeter. U.S. Department of Justice Tax Division Trial Attorney Mark Williams. And that's all the crew assembled back there. We're here this afternoon to announce the federal indictment of Douglas L. Swenson, 64, of Eagle, Idaho. Mark A. Ellison, 64, of Boise, Idaho. David D. Swenson, 35, also of Boise. And Jeremy S. Swenson, 40, of Meridian, Idaho, for conspiracy to commit securities fraud, wire fraud, mail fraud, and interstate transportation of stolen property, all stemming from their involvement in a DBSI group of companies. Douglas Swenson is the founder and former president of DBSI. Mark Ellison, another founder of DBSI, served as DBSI's general counsel during the period charged in the indictment. David Swenson and Jeremy Swenson were assistant secretaries for DBSI. Founded in 1979 and headquartered in Meridian, DBSI was essentially a conglomerate of real estate and non-real estate companies, including DBSI Housing and DBSI Securities. The 83-count indictment returned by the federal grand jury in Boise earlier today also charges all 4 of the defendants with 39 counts of securities fraud, 34 counts of wire fraud, 6 counts of interstate transportation of stolen property, and 2 counts of bank fraud. Douglas Swenson is also charged with conspiracy to commit money laundering. According to the indictment, the fraud and conspiracy charges involved the non-public offerings for multiple commercial real estate investment projects in, among others, 6 different states: Virginia, Illinois, Georgia, Missouri, North Dakota, and Texas. The bank fraud charges arise out of projects in Georgia and Illinois in which DBSI originally obtained financing from financial institutions in order to purchase commercial real estate, which it then repackaged and resold to investors. The indictment alleges that the defendants made false and fraudulent statements in order to secure those funds. Of course, an indictment is a means of charging a person with criminal activity. It is not evidence. The person is presumed innocent until proven guilty beyond a reasonable doubt in a court of law. Today's indictment is the product of a lengthy, thorough, and detailed investigation by federal agents from the FBI and the IRS criminal investigations. The next step is for these 4 defendants to make their initial appearance in court to answer the charges and to have a date set for trial. No initial appearance date has yet been set, but we anticipate having that soon, and we'll advise you of that date when it becomes available. In a related case, former DBSI Chief Operating Officer Gary Bringhurst pleaded guilty in federal court in Boise on Monday of this week to 1 count of conspiracy to commit securities fraud. According to Gary Bringhurst's plea agreement, he conspired to mislead DBSI investors by, among other things, falsifying financial statements for DBSI Housing. The plea agreement for Mr. Bringhurst also states that one of the properties about which DBSI made false and fraudulent representations was Oakwood Plaza, LLC, in Alton, Illinois. The conduct to which Mr. Bringhurst pled guilty is also charged in the indictment returned today. Another note of caution: charges against individual defendants must be considered separately. Mr. Bringhurst's guilty plea is not, in and of itself, evidence of the guilt of any of the defendants charged today. Again, the 4 defendants charged in today's indictment are presumed innocent until and unless proven guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. The charges in today's indictment focus on the time period from January of 2007 through November of 2008, which is when DBSI declared bankruptcy. According to the indictment, the defendants publicly represented to investors that DBSI was a profitable company and had a net worth in excess of $105 million. The indictment further alleges that despite those representations, the defendants knew that DBSI's real estate and non-real estate business activities were universally unprofitable, that DBSI's business model was losing approximately $3 million a month, and that DBSI was relying on new investor funds, including investor funds that DBSI promised to safeguard and use only in particular circumstances. They use these funds to instead to continue operations and pay returns to other DBSI investors. The criminal allegations set forth in the indictment center around material omissions as well as false and fraudulent representations made to investors about investment products that involve tenant-in-common 1031 exchanged interests, also called TIC or TIC investments. Related to the TIC or TIC investments was the master lease investment product. DBSI promoted the master lease through which DBSI leased back commercial real estate that it first sold to TIC investors as providing investors with a reliable, fixed monthly return on their investment backed by financial support and substantial net worth of DBSI. That's all right, that's not on, so you can probably just put it anywhere. You guys, it's fine, so the only one's on. This is all. Okay. Also, according to the indictment, although the defendants knew of DBSI's true and deteriorating financial position, they withheld accurate financial information and took steps to conceal DBSI's true financial condition from investors, financial advisors, broker-dealers, due diligence officers, DBSI wholesalers, and other DBSI employees. The indictment alleges that in disclosures to investors, the defendants falsely and fraudulently misrepresented DBSI's housing's net worth, failed to disclose DBSI's cash shortages and deteriorating finances, misrepresented the likelihood of repayment on large investments in high-tech venture capital entities, and failed to disclose DBSI's dependence on new investor money to meet its existing obligations. Federal investigators and federal prosecutors must and do take investment fraud seriously. Investment fraud undermines markets, bilks investors of promised returns, and creates unnecessary loss at a time when our economy is still struggling to recover. Those who seek to induce others to invest their hard-earned money in complex financial deals have a solemn duty to act with honesty and integrity. The statutory maximums for the 83 counts charged in the indictment subject these defendants, if convicted, to decades in prisons and substantial fines. A complete listing of the potential penalties is contained in the written press release. Of course, as most of you know, federal sentencing is structured by sentencing guidelines, which in financial fraud cases are set primarily by the amount of financial loss. It is simply too early to tell at this point what those accurate guidelines would be, and of course, these defendants are presumed innocent. In addition, based on the conspiracy and fraud charges, the indictment seeks forfeiture of properties and assets totaling $169 million. The FBI special agents, IRS-CI special agents, and the federal prosecutors standing before you have worked hard and conducted a detailed investigation. They have spent countless hours, days, evenings, and weekends to bring us to this point. I commend their work and their service. And now I'll turn the podium over to Special Agent in Charge, Stephen Boyd.
Good afternoon, members of the press. I just have a few comments. Again, I just want to support what the U.S. Attorney just stated, that the indictment of the DBSI principals was a team effort on the part of FBI, Boise United States Attorney's Office, the Department of Justice Tax Division, and FBI. Our agents worked very hard on this case. each of our agencies and the U.S. Attorney's Office and Department of Justice bring their own area of expertise to the team to achieve a common goal. In this case, to pursue the corporate officers of DBSI who victimized their investors and violated the public trust. The role of IRS criminal investigation was to uncover the financial aspects of the scheme and follow the money. The investigation team uncovered a scheme to defraud investors, which was like a house of cards. The underlying structure was weak and fell apart and left many of the investors in financial ruin. Thank you.
And now we'll hear from Resident Agent in Charge, Ernie Wyand.
My name is Ernie Wyand. I'm the supervisor for the FBI in Southern Idaho, part of the Salt Lake City Division. I just wanted to say we hope to assure the public the FBI is committed to identifying, investigating, and collaborating with our law enforcement partners to pursue allegations of investment fraud and to work with federal prosecutors to bring charges in these matters. In this particular case, DBSI, special agents from the FBI, special agents from the IRS Criminal Investigative Division, dedicated tremendous time and resources and effort to this case to bring it to this point. We'll continue to work together closely and work with the federal prosecutors through the process, through the judicial process. I'd like to thank the United States Attorney's Office for their tremendous work and efforts in this case, along with their IRS Criminal Investigative Group. Thank you.
At this point, we'll take your questions. Keep in mind at this stage of the case, because it is charged and the defendants enjoy the presumption of innocence, that we are limited in the amount of information we can provide really to what is set forth in the indictment. And we can make, the indictment is now available through the court's PACER site, and we can make copies of that as well as a press release that we're issuing available to all of you. Ms. Early in the back from the office staff has copies of those for all of you.
I guess, oh, go ahead.
I just want to start with a couple of things. David and Jeremy Swenson are what relationship to Douglas Swenson?
They're Mr. Swenson. They are the sons of
They are the sons. Mm-hmm. Can you give us any kind of color or sense about what had to happen in this investigation? How far you had to travel? How many documents you had to look through? What kind of a trail was this to follow and piece together?
Well, I guess I'd have to say all of those things. As you can tell, the investigation involved properties from throughout the United States. The investigators in this case have looked through thousands and thousands of documents, and in any case of this nature, there are certainly lots of witnesses to talk to, and a lot of analyzing to be done before we can get to this point.
Is there any dollar amount on how much they did defraud? Is that
The forfeiture count sets forth an amount of $169 million, which would be certainly an amount that is considered to be lost in this case. That's how forfeiture counts work.
And you said this started around 2007. I guess there was a lot of, financial things like this going on. I guess why does an investigation like this take so long?
Well, I think really that can be answered in part with the answer I provided to Mr. Roberts, which is there are thousands of documents to look through. It's a case that covered properties all over the United States, from, as alleged in the indictment, I guess the closest one would be, let's see how bad my geography is, North Dakota, and the furthest away certainly is Georgia. And so really to review all of those materials. I think you see before you the people who worked on the case, and really many of us are supervisors, so the really hard work is done by the investigative agents and the prosecutors who are assigned to the case, and they spent a lot of time and effort working on it, but really it just takes that long, and virtually any financial fraud investigation to work through all of the documents and try to piece them together.
I see. And as far as the four who were indicted, would they be considered executives of the company?
Well, Mr. Douglas Swenson is the founder, was the president of DBSI. Jeremy and David Swenson were assistant secretaries of the of DBSI, and Mr. Ellison was the corporate counsel at the time of charging the indictment, but was one of the founders. They're identified in our press release as principals of the company, so perhaps that's the best way to describe them.
Wendy, could you go over again the charges and how many counts?
Sure, there's one count of conspiracy to commit securities fraud, wire fraud, mail fraud, and interstate transportation of stolen property. All of the defendants are charged in that count. There is one count of conspiracy to commit money laundering. Douglas Swenson alone is charged in that count. There are 39 substantive counts of securities fraud. All 4 defendants are charged in those counts. There are 34 counts of wire fraud. All 4 defendants are charged in those counts. There are 6 counts of interstate transportation of stolen property. All 4 defendants are charged in those counts. And there are 2 counts of bank fraud, and again, all 4 defendants are charged in those counts. And at the very end of the indictment are the forfeiture allegations and the assets and properties identified there do add up to a total of $169 million.
Can you explain a little bit about the money laundering conspiracy? What did that involve?
Money laundering basically involves taking illegal proceeds or proceeds that were gained from criminal conduct and doing something else financially with them. So in this case, there are transactions in excess of $10,000. Did I get that right? George Bryson-Meter saying I got that right.
Did the indictment, because I didn't read that far before I got here, did it explain what he is accused of doing in regards to that?
It does not identify individual transactions.
Do some of the victims now know about this, and what was their reaction?
Well, I personally have not spoken with any of the victims. Our office is required and has been in contact with thousands of potential victims in this case as required under the Department of Justice's victim witness guidelines.
Were there any attempts at plea negotiations prior to this going to the grand jury with any of these 4?
Well, that wouldn't be an appropriate question for me to answer at this time. Whether someone had been involved in plea negotiations and the details of those are things that would not be admissible in trial, and so it wouldn't be fair to the defendants to go into any of that.
How long did the grand jury process take?
The overall investigation covered a period of about 4 years. There's certainly a lot of information looked at, and as is required by the Constitution, sufficient evidence had to be presented to the grand jury for them to find probable cause as to all of the charges in the indictment. So it was a lengthy process.
I'm sorry, just so I understand, does the grand jury look at that over the 4 years, or do you just
No.
present them all the evidence
No,
at once?
the grand jury, the bulk of the grand jury investigation, we're required to present all of the evidence to the same grand jury that returns the indictment. And each grand jury here only sits for a year at a time. So the grand jury that returned the indictment is the grand jury that was impaneled by the court in June of last year.
When did DBSI, when did that begin operation?
It began in 1979.
Okay. And closed in 08.
It declared bankruptcy in November 2008.
Is it your intent to go to court and attempt to recover the $169 million in your trial, in your case?
Well, the purpose of the forfeiture allegations is to allow us to pursue those assets and properties. So yes.
If you do, where would that go? Would it go back to the investors?
Yeah, the asset forfeiture, the purpose of the asset forfeiture in this case is to try to make the victims whole if we prevail and go through the process as required.
And where are these 4 people now? Are they in jail? Are they at home? Are they on what's their status?
The arrest warrants were not issued in connection with the return of the indictment. Instead, the court will be issuing summonses to these individuals. Their attorneys are aware of the return of the indictment.
And is there a date when they will go to court?
That date has not yet been set. We're frankly expecting it any minute, but I checked right before we came out, and it's not been set. So those of you who have pacer accounts, that should pop up relatively quickly.
And it was Douglas, correct? Douglas
Correct.
Swenson?
Yeah, and there are copies of the press release that Ms. Early can provide
Thank you.
to you that has it all in writing.
DBS Housing, you make reference to both in the indictment here. Is that one of the companies?
Yeah, that's one of the affiliated, what we call the DBSI group of companies. I'd like to thank you all for coming, and again, thank the folks from the IRS, CI, from FBI, and from my office who've worked hard to get us to this point. We know there's a long way to go, and of course, the defendants in this case certainly have all of their rights afforded to criminal defendants under the Constitution, and will have their ability to address these charges otherwise. I do want to just point out a couple of other sort of related matters in case you're interested. The case against Matthew Hutchison on trial right now. Mr. Hutchison, I'm told, is on the stand, so if any of you have anything else exciting you want to do, want to head over to the courthouse and watch the defendant testify, that is going on. And then tomorrow afternoon at 2, we'll be holding another press conference to announce the final sentencings and wrap up the BMC RICO gang case that was indicted in March of 2011, and the final sentencings are tomorrow. It's a very successful gang case, cooperatively investigated by a number of federal, state, and local agencies, and prosecuted by both our office and the Canyon County Prosecuting Attorney's Office. Well, thanks everyone for coming.